What's going on, everybody? It's Achilles OBT coming at you with a brand new build video, and in today's video we will be reviewing the newest addition to the Heroes of the Storm lineup, Greymane. He is listed as a range assassin, as you can see right there, but in all actuality he's actually both a range assassin and a melee assassin. Where would I kind of start with this? Well, for one, Greymane was the only hero from the new lineup that was coming when they announced Lunara and Cho'Gao alongside him. Greymane was the only one that I was excited to actually play, and to be brutally honest, he's actually a lot more fun than I thought he was going to be to use. My first game that I played with him, I actually didn't feel that comfortable at all, but with that being said, I had like a terrible first half, but a very, very good second half. I died like 9 or 10 times in that game, but still somehow had 82,000 hero damage in that game as well, and kind of led the charge in the second half. But that's neither here nor there. That's just like a first outside assessment of Greymane. I actually do have quite a bit of experience with him now. You see that my Greymane is at level 9. I've been playing quite a bit with him, and with this build that I'm going to be showcasing in this video, I have amassed 245 kills so far with him, and I just got him this past Tuesday, just like everybody else. So, going into his abilities, his Q ability, well, I should start off with his trait, because that's really what everything is tied to. The Curse of the Worgen, he's able to shapeshift between being a human and a Worgen, and his human basic attacks are ranged, and his Worgen, as I mentioned earlier, his Worgen basic attacks are melee. So depending on what form you play, that really determines whether he's a ranged assassin or a melee assassin. Now, one thing that I kind of want to throw out there about Greymane in advance is that I'm already seeing a common opinion that he's really not a great hero at all, and that maybe he's one to avoid. But the truth of the matter is, he's actually every bit the same kind of hero as a lot of other assassins in the game, meaning that his effectiveness is directly tied to your ability to keep him alive. Like, that's really what it is. Like, whether you're a healer, a support player, or a tank that's playing alongside another user using Greymane, or if you're using Greymane yourself, really everything about what you can and can't do is directly tied to your ability to stay alive. And if you can stay alive with Greymane, he is a monster on the damage front, and even on the kill front. He's got the rare ability to not only land a lot of damage on single targets, but actually be able to finish his own kills as well. So that's something that you definitely got to take advantage of. If I had to make a comparison for Greymane when he's used the right way, I would say that in human form, he's just like Raynor, and in Worgen form, he's a lot like Illidan. But the difference with him, with that second comparison, is that he's actually stronger than Illidan. From start to finish, Illidan's early game is very, very hard to use. It's very, very weak, and it's hard to get your game off in the early game. Greymane has no such issue as far as his Worgen form goes, or as far as either form goes. He can actually put out a good amount of damage and secure kills right from the onset if you know how to use him. So that's something that I feel like is already kind of going under the radar as far as Greymane goes, because he's still new, so he hasn't necessarily been figured out yet, and a lot of people are just kind of writing him off, saying that he's a shit hero and whatnot, and that's really not the case. So going into his Q ability now, his Gilnean Cocktail, he damages the first enemy hit and deals heavy damage behind them. You hurl a flask that deals 69 damage to the first enemy hit and explodes for 207 damage to the enemies in a cone behind them. And as you see in his Worgen form, the same exact button is the Razor Swipe, where you swipe forward and damage enemies you pass through. So one thing I will note about the Gilnean Cocktail is that it can be used for a range of things, depending on how you play, depending on how you spec. Now, I wouldn't necessarily advise fully speccing into the Gilnean Cocktail, because you're really, really crippling Greymane on other fronts where he needs to be built up. But the cocktail is definitely useful for wave clear situations, and if you're playing against a cloaked hero like in Nova or Zeratul, the Gilnean cocktail is really the only means that that Greymane has to really, really decloak those heroes, and that's only if you spec into it at level 1. So I mean, you pick your poison there, like with whether or not you want to spec into it. One thing I will, well, I'll actually save that for when I get into the actual talent build and whatnot. His W ability, moving along. So one thing I didn't mention about Greymane is that he's 100% an auto attack hero. So he doesn't really have that many abilities that have flat out damage tied to them. His Gilnean cocktail, a lot like Raynor, his Q ability is the only ability he has that deals direct damage. So again, that's just another comparison. That's another point on that comparison that I made a little while ago. His Q ability is the only ability he has that does direct damage. Everything else is a buff of some kind. So his W ability is Inner Beast. You gain a massive attack speed boost and keep it for as long as you keep attacking. Now, you gain a 50% attack speed for 3 seconds and basic attacks refresh this duration. The thing about this ability is that it is extremely, extremely viable. It's extremely good. But the cooldown is 16 seconds. So you in a way, you have to make sure that whether you go with my build or not, you have to make sure you make this count, because at the end of the day, all of Greymane's damage is, or at least I would say more than half of his damage is tied to how effective you are with Inner Beast, like when you choose to use it, and like how many targets you could possibly get shots off on before like they disengage and they're no longer in range. So you have to make it count with Inner Beast, whether you use my build or not. You have to make it count. So that's just something that I want to put out there now. Moving along to his E ability, Dark Flight. This is the ability. This is the your button that allows you to change back and forth between the Worgen form and the human form. And since you start in the human form, you see that it's Dark Flight. You leap at an enemy and shapeshift into a Worgen. And as a Worgen, it changes to disengage. You roll away and shapeshift into a human. Now, it's one thing that I want to mention as a negative for Greymane is that he has absolutely no escapability to him whatsoever. The closest thing he has to escapability is his disengage, and it's really not something that's viable on its own unless you want to spec into it. But again, I'm not so sure like how much you want to do that. I'm not so sure if that's the right call. I'm not saying that it's flat out the wrong call, but I'm just saying there are viable things that you're going to be leaving on the table depending on the decisions you make. Like, what do you feel like you really need on him? What do you feel like you could go do without? So just something to keep in mind. Moving along to his heroics. His first heroic is Go for the Throat. You eviscerate a hero and refresh the cooldown if they die. It only has a 60-second cooldown, so you leap at an enemy hero and shapeshift into a Worgen, slashing 3 times for 375 total damage. Again, that's just the starter number for that. That number is actually higher once you get it at level 10. It does more damage than that, so that's just something. That's just a placeholder number for now. If this kills them, the ability can be used a second time within 10 seconds for free. So the thing with Go for the Throat that I've noticed is that it's viable no matter what, but it may not be the greatest choice to wait until like a target is low on health to use it, because it does a lot of damage no matter what. The cooldown thing at the end of that is situational. Like, sometimes you have to go in on a target in order to keep your teammates alive, because of a team fight may not be going in your favor and you have to make a decision like before you're ready to make the decision. So it's really up to you. I personally I get a lot of kills with Go for the Throat, but I don't get a lot of back-to-back kills with it. I'll be the first to admit that right now. Like, I don't really get to take full advantage of the free reset. So, I mean, to each their own. If you are a player that gets full value out of it, then more power to you, because so far I really haven't, but that doesn't stop me from picking Go for the Throat. Go for the Throat is absolutely the way that I go with the heroics, and I'll say why ahead of time now, because I've tried both Go for the Throat and Marked for the Kill. I actually liked both heroics, but at the end of the day, I found that my effectiveness as an assassin, and I literally mean just me. Both my damage numbers and my kill count were a lot lower every time I used Marked for the Kill. Like, it became like really, really obvious that a lot of the output that I get is because of the decision that I make at 10 and the way that I use it. So again, like, figure out like what kind of player you are and choose the better heroic between the two for your own playstyle. But for me personally, it's Go for the Throat, even if I don't always get full advantage out of that free reset. So moving on to his second heroic. that I just mentioned a little bit, marked for the kill. You make a hero vulnerable and reactivate. You can reactivate the button to leap at them. Basically, and again, this is another upside to this heroic as well. Both heroics with Greymane have 60-second cooldown, so the cooldown does not factor into your decision making at all. It says shapeshift into a human, but you can cast this ability even as a human. Same thing for the go for the throat. If you're already in Worgen form, you can still use the ability afterwards, so don't pay any mind to that. But you shapeshift into a human and fire a shot hitting the first enemy hero for 68 damage. For 5 seconds, they are vulnerable, taking 25% more damage, and when you reactivate the ability, you leap at them, shapeshifting into a Worgen. So, basically, what I found this heroic to be especially good for was to actually land this on enemy tanks, on front lines. I'm the type of person that takes full advantage of any situation that sees me casting a vulnerable on a high HP hero, because it's something that really brings them back down to earth. You see that aggressiveness just take a major hit and they start backing away, and it almost acts like you're peeling them for your team. So it's definitely something that I use to take advantage, but again, going back to what I mentioned before, I found that my damage numbers overall and my kill count wasn't neither of those two stat lines were as high as I had them when I was going with go for the throat. So if your output isn't as good, you're not really helping your team as much on paper. You could be doing other things to help them. But me personally, I find that Greymane was meant to take heroes out, not so much to like soak XP and jungle, if you will. Like, he's not meant for that. He's meant for actually doing damage to enemy heroes and sealing kills. So that's he quite literally is like a pure assassin in that way. So if you're not putting out damage, you're not getting kills, you're not really doing much with Greymane out there, and it almost feels like a wasted pick. Now, one thing that I actually did forget to mention until just now, is that I noticed that Greymane has a little bit of an unwritten rule to him, in that his Worgen form is actually extremely effective against tanks, because he does an extra 40% damage with each auto attack. He's actually a bit of a tank buster in a way, like towards the late game especially. When he hits tanks, they're not able to take too many swipes from him in Worgen form before they have to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to stay or run away. So it's definitely something that you want to take advantage of whenever you're in Worgen form. Not so much the case when you're in human form. Not saying his human form is weak, because it damn sure isn't. His human form is really strong too. But I definitely noticed that early on, that his Worgen form is extremely good against tanks. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Now, moving along to his talent selections. Now, one thing that I kind of want to put out there beforehand is that I personally feel like there's a few levels where, to be brutally honest, none of the talents that you can select really jump out at you. Like, none of them really stand out as a clear-cut choice, but that's just my personal opinion. Somebody else with another build video could feel completely different than me on that point, and maybe it's something that you want to see for yourself and like read into everything and like see how you feel, see what you think, and make that decision for yourself. But me personally, I feel like there were some good opportunities left on the table with some of the talents they gave Greymane. So it's unfortunate, but it happens. Now, at level 1, me personally, what I first tried to use, and let me get it out of the way first. Scented tincture right here, the Gilnean cocktail reveals heroes. This is what you want to pick if you're afraid that a Zeratul or a Nova are going to spend the entire game just looking for you. And it's happened to me before. It really has, but it was never something that I felt the need to pick. But if you feel like the cloaked heroes you're playing against are going to be a problem, this is going to be the way you want to go. Like, in all honesty, you want to go this route. This is basically the same thing as Rexar's Flare. You get it right at level 1, and it basically negates whatever damage buffs those cloaked heroes have, and it negates their ability to catch you sleeping, catch you out of position. So definitely something you want to look at. It's probably viable. I would have no doubt that it's extremely viable. As far as like a counter pick. But When I first used Greymane, I elected to try out Viciousness because I saw that it increased the inner beast duration, and the ability damage also refreshed it. So my thought process was, literally, no matter what, as long as I was attacking, I would maintain the inner beast. And while technically that's true, that's all good and that's accurate, I found that there was really no need for me to run this because I could do a good enough job off of with his auto attacks alone to keep Inner Beast going. I didn't need that extra safety net with ability damage. It wasn't needed at all to keep this thing running. And again, I pointed out earlier that it has a 16-second cooldown. So that cooldown is pretty massive for an auto attack hero that's low on ability damage as it is. So that's something to keep in mind. Like with the Greymane cocktail, you have 9 seconds in between each toss. So it's not like you're going to be spamming off those throws to keep this thing going. So with that being put out there, I elect to go for Wolfheart instead, where basic attacks lower the Inner Beast cooldown. So while Inner Beast is active, again, that's the operative part of this sentence. While Inner Beast is active, each basic attack lowers its cooldown by 1 second. So you think if you queue up Inner Beast, the combo meter pulls up, which I think is really fucking cool because it looks like a fighting game type of thing. But if you get 16 auto attacks after you queue this up, you immediately can queue it up again when it runs out. So essentially, you can keep Inner Beast going for long periods of time, so long as you're aggressive. And again, it doesn't matter if you're basic attacking as a human or basic attacking as a Worgen. And really, the real trick to playing Greymane effectively is playing down the middle, knowing when to switch to Worgen, knowing when to stay in human form. Greymane is not top tier if you only play one form the whole way. So definitely get that out of your heads. If you're thinking that you're just going to play as one and not the other, you will not be able to play him effectively. You have to be able to use both because both have their places, both have their uses. So again, Wolfheart is the way that I go because it effectively allows me to spam off the Inner Beast at will, like for long periods of time. At level 4, this is kind of one of the this is one of the talent levels I was kind of talking about, like that I alluded to, where I felt like there was a lot left on the table because what I'm seeing a lot of people so far go for is Thick Skin, which basically gives him a block every time he goes into Worgen form, but that only blocks heroic basic attacks. So if you're not playing against basic attack heroes, auto attack heroes, you're really not getting much value out of this. And again, there's also the issue that he only gets block charges if he shapeshifts into Worgen form, and you're not gonna be. Anybody that's played Greymane a lot by now knows that he's not the kind of hero that you can just keep running into fight after fight after fight, just like spamming your E and switching into Worgen and surviving. It does not work like that. He's way too squishy for that to work, and Thick Skin is not strong enough to allow him to just dive into fights in Worgen form over and over and over and over again. Eyes in the Dark, kind of the same boat, but not as bad. When you disengage, it grants you stealth for 4 seconds. So this is actually something that you would look at. I complained earlier that he has no escapability to him whatsoever. Eyes in the Dark would kind of be a direct way to address that right at level 4. Every time you disengage, you go into stealth mode, so you could have an easier time running away, depending on whether or not your enemy has a way to kind of decloak you. So that it all depends on that. Now, again, I mentioned earlier that you don't want to spec into the Greymane cocktail because you're kind of leaving a lot of other options on the table. And again, I mentioned that everybody already goes for Thick Skin as it is. So if you wanted to go for like a bigger explosion length by 35%, you're leaving defense on the table. You're leaving escapability on the table. And not only that, but you're leaving the option that I actually elect to go for, which is Insatiable, where Inner Beast causes basic attacks to restore mana it restores 5 mana up to 120. So basically, the reason why I pick Insatiable is because I spam off that W ability quite a bit as it is, and I've gotten good at keeping the counter going, knowing when I can just keep it running. So mana can become a bit of an issue for Greymane if he's out there for too long without recalling or going to a fountain. Mana can become a bit of an issue if depending on how often you're spamming your abilities. And with Insatiable, because I spend most of my time with the Inner Beast active anyway, Greymane is almost always at full mana. Once you hit level 4, mana becomes a non-issue altogether, and you find that you have more than enough mana to spam off all of his abilities, like in the mid game and the late game. Insatiable, right at level 4, is a direct way to address any kind of mana issues you may or may not be having, depending on how you're playing. So I find it to be very, very viable. Um, Moving along to level 7. Level 7 at first look, I wasn't really sure how to feel about it, but I'm kind of gonna wing this because there's gonna be two talents that I'm gonna talk about here, because what I typically elect to go for is Wizened Duelist, where hero takedowns increase your basic attack damage by 3% to a maximum of 30%. This is basically like Greymane's version of Gathering Power, but instead of it tying that damage to his abilities, it ties it to his auto attacks instead. So again, this is like a direct talent that's affiliated with what I said earlier, that you may want to like Greymane's effectiveness is tied to his ability to stay alive. I've had several times where I've had the 30% boost active at all times, and it definitely is viable. It doesn't matter what you shoot at, they feel it. But again, that all depends on your ability to stay alive, like knowing how to go bounce back and forth between Worgen form and human form. Now, the other ability that I want to mention, because this is something that I may actually experiment with in the second part of this video, is Incendiary Elixir, where it increases the Greymane cocktail damage on impact, and it always explodes. Now, that's the operative part of this upgrade that caught my attention when I looked at it. The cocktail always explodes. Now, if you don't have this, the cocktail only does the back damage if you land it on something. If you do not land it on something, it just breaks on the floor and nothing happens. Now, that last part that I just said, that could also be like, I don't know, I've never used Scented Tincture. So I don't know if this works regardless of whether the cocktail breaks or whether it doesn't, but you got to think that if it doesn't work, if you have to land it on something for this to work, that Incendiary Elixir is a direct way to kind of make that work all the time. Now, the other upside to this upgrade right here is that it deals 200% more damage to the enemy it impacts, and again, like I said, it explodes even if it misses. So you're doing 200% more damage with this, and like in the late game, for people who've never played like past a 20-minute game with Greymane, if you don't spec into the cocktail, it still puts out about like 500 plus damage after a while. So you got to think that with Incendiary Elixir, you can get to orange tier damage a lot faster just because you spec'd into it at level 7. So again, typically I go for Wizened Duelist, but for the sake of the second half of the video, I kind of want to experiment with this and see if it's viable. Level 10, we already covered. You go for the throat. Level 13, this is another one that I kind of feel like there's not much going on here at all, and there was a lot left on the table. Running Wild is kind of good in the sense that your disengage and your pounce basically become a little more viable just because they have more range tied to it. But I don't feel like it's something that warrants, like, it has a level 13 feel. Like usually like at level 13, that's when you start to get like either your big boy defensive ability or your big boy setup offensive ability, because 16 then becomes like the real like game changer. But here at 13, I don't feel like Greymane has anything along those lines. I typically pick visceral attacks because your Worgen basic attacks reduce the razor swipe cooldown by 1 second. Now picking this actually makes Greymane able to spam his Qs a lot more often while he's a wolf, but again, it doesn't have that level 13 feel to it, so it's like I pick it by default. I'll say that right now. I definitely pick it by default. On the Prowl, I tried out because I felt like when I read it on paper that it would be a way to give Greymane some escapability, but in actual practice, it's really not at all. Inner Beast increases your movement speed by 30% once it has been active for 3 seconds. So this could actually be like fairly decent for chasing, but not good at all for getting away from danger. So that's something that I want to put out there right now. And then Unfettered Assault increases the Razor Swipe range, but increases its cooldown. Now, if the I like that it increases its range by 60%, but for its part, with the cooldown being increased, I feel like it would have been better off if it increased its damage instead of its range, but with the same penalty to the cooldown. So I don't know. I think this is a judgment call for whoever's watching this at level 13. I think you should make a judgment call. To play it absolutely safe, you may want to go running wild just because your E ability gets that much more range. But me personally, like I said, I go for visceral attacks because it lets me spam my Qs a lot more, and I do mean spam. Like you get that Q ability like every 2 to 3 seconds with this, so it's definitely something that helps you play a little more aggressive when in Worgen form. Now in level 16, at level 16, I feel like Executioner is kind of like a weird talent for Greymane to have because he has no means of slowing people down or anything like that. So, like, this is fully dependent on your teammates doing this for you. So, in those cases, I don't like Executioner. I think Relentless Predator is actually really good. He reduces the duration of silences, stuns, slows, roots, and polymorphs against you by 75%. Kind of like Sonya in Super Saiyan mode if you fully spec into it at level 20. It turns all that down. It dumps it down by 75% while in Worgen form. So, it basically makes you a bit of a tank as far as, like, crowd control goes. But that's about it. Concentrated Blast is another one that seems pretty scary. Where if you have Inner Beast active, it increases Gilnean Cocktail's damage by 80%. If you pair that with the Incendiary at level 7, that's quite a bit of damage that you're putting out there if you land that bad boy while Inner Beast is active. So that's something, maybe you want to experiment with that. But me personally, I go for Alpha Killer, which increases your basic attack as a Worgen against heroes. This is basically his version of Giant Killer, but instead of the 1% that 1.5% that everybody else is stuck with, Greymane gets 3% of a hero's maximum health every time every time his Worgen basic attack lands. So definitely, this is the ability that really like pushes through what I said earlier about Greymane being a bit of a tank buster, a bit of a tank killer. Once you get Alpha Killer and he swipes at tanks, they just go down really fucking fast. It is crazy. And at level 20, oops, clicked the wrong thing. Level 20 is the last talent level that I kind of felt like a lot was left on the table. Nothing really stands out. I feel like everything is kind of even, so it's like I never really know what the hardcore solid go-to pick is here. I think I'm just going to say that you should go with whatever your play style tells you to. So if you're good, what do I mean by that? That means if you're good with go for the throat at getting kills, go for Unleash, because then you get an extra cast. If you get 2 kills with it, you can go for a third one, and that basically is a guaranteed team wipe. If you already have 3 people down by yourself, that's a guaranteed team wipe if you have teammates with you and the other team is not disengaging. So if you're good with that heroic, go for the throat. Gilnean Roulette, excuse me, marked for the kill passes through enemy heroes, making all of them vulnerable and allowing leap to be used on each marked target once. Now I feel like this is another one that if you ended up taking marked for the kill, I feel like this is kind of a no-brainer, because then you can just shoot the bullet through an entire team if they're clumped up that way, and it makes everybody vulnerable and making them like very squishy for your teammates to go in on. So this is another good one if you're good with that heroic. Hunter's Blunderbuss. Now this is one that I've been choosing here lately because I like that the human basic attack has a splash damage for 100% behind the targets. So it basically gives Greymane a very hardcore source of wave clear, all the way, albeit all the way at level 20. But not only that, if you happen to be shooting in human form at a full enemy team, that damage is going to spread around quite nicely. And by the late game, Greymane's auto attacks are pretty fucking serious. So Hunter's Blunderbuss, I feel like, is very viable. It's what I've been going for here lately. And then finally, Tooth and Claw, the Worgen form, basic attacks cleave. Same exact thing as the Hunter's Blunderbuss, but for the Worgen. So, again, go with what your playstyle tells you with this. Go with what your playstyle tells you, and Pray for the best, because I feel like nothing really stands out at level 20, but again, that's just my opinion. So going over a brief review, at level 1 you go for Wolfheart so that you can kill, you can nerf that hardcore 16-second cooldown and stay in Inner Beast a lot more often. Again, Inner Beast is where a lot of Greymane's damage is tied to. Level 4, I personally go for Insatiable, because again, you're going to be spending more than half of your game in Inner Beast mode, so you're going to need mana on deck at all times for when shit gets serious and you need to use some of your abilities to secure kills. Insatiable makes sure that you have a full tank ready to go at the start of every single fight. Level 7, I typically went for Wizened Duelist to add a little more basic attack damage. This is basically his version of Gathering Power. But again, for the sake of the second half of the video, I may actually experiment with Incendiary Elixir, or I may just do that on my own time to see what it looks like. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, but both of these seem extremely viable right here. So either way you want to go, you can go. Like both abilities seem viable. Again, both abilities, both heroics are actually viable in their own ways, but for the sake of my build, I go for the throat, because the damage is a lot more consistent, and it's very, very good at securing kills. Whether you land it as a last hit or use it as an initiate hit, it's very, very viable on single target damage. Level 13. Again, I go for visceral attacks, just so that I can spam off the razor swipe in Worgen form. It gives him more to do, because at melee range, after that jump, after you engage with your E, the Worgen form really struggles to stick to targets. So having visceral attacks, lowering that cooldown on the Q ability kind of helps with that a little bit. But you're not making any wrong choices if you go with Running Wild instead, or if you want to try out On the Prowl or anything like that. I really don't think you're going the wrong way. It's just the fact that I don't feel like anything stands out. Level 16. Level 16, I like to go for Alpha Killer, because this basically gives Greymane like an immediate out to like pretty much take down anything he swings at, tanks included. Like this one is really, really good against tanks. It's exactly, I believe it's exactly the same as Artanis's Titan Killer. It's the same thing but with a different first word. So this is his equivalent of Giant Killer. But it does more damage. Giant Killer typically does 1.5% of a hero's maximum health, whereas Alpha Killer does 3%. So this thing is incredibly viable. Again, if you need a backup pick and you want to go for defense instead, Relentless Predator is extremely viable with a 75% nerf to all silences, stuns, slows, roots, and polymorphs. This thing, so long as you're in Worgen form, will make you hard to control. Level 20, again, I would say go with what your playstyle tells you to go with, because each of these has their own use. It's just, in my personal opinion, I don't feel like any one choice is extremely better than all of the other choices. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Again, I may experiment with the second half of this video. I don't know. I haven't really decided yet, but for what it's worth, I feel like Greymane is an extremely good hero if you take the time out to learn how to properly use him. His damage is extremely viable, and he's a lot of fun to use. Hopefully you return for the second half of this video where we actually showcase it. I appreciate all the support as always. This is Achilles LBT. That's Achilles with a Z. Remember it.